The quarterback situation for the Pittsburgh Steelers has become one of the most fascinating storylines of the NFL offseason. For months, the franchise has been loosely connected to Aaron Rodgers, with speculation suggesting Pittsburgh might be willing to wait deep into the offseason for the veteran quarterback to make a decision. But that strategy carries obvious risk. Rodgers, now in the twilight of his career, could choose to retire or sign elsewhere. If that happens, the Steelers would suddenly find themselves scrambling for a starting quarterback just weeks before the season. Because of that uncertainty, some analysts are urging Pittsburgh to prepare a backup plan. And one unexpected name that keeps surfacing is Derek Carr. Why Derek Carr is suddenly in the conversation? Carr is one of the most unusual quarterback cases currently connected to the National Football League. Just a few years ago, he signed a 4-year, $150 million contract with the New Orleans Saints, signaling that the team viewed him as a long-term franchise quarterback. But injuries changed the trajectory of his career. Carr began experiencing persistent pain in his throwing shoulder following the 2024 season. Surgery and a lengthy rehabilitation process were potential options, and rather than commit to that uncertainty, Carr chose to step away from the game. He officially retired in May 2025. Now, after a year away from football, the possibility of a comeback has quietly resurfaced. And if Carr does decide to return, Pittsburgh might represent one of the few teams that could realistically consider him. The Steelers' quarterback uncertainty. Pittsburgh's quarterback situation has been unsettled for several seasons. The organization has explored multiple options while trying to identify a stable long-term answer. That search has naturally led them to Rodgers, a future Hall of Famer who could provide immediate credibility and veteran leadership. However, Rodgers has not committed to any team yet. If the Steelers continue waiting for him and he ultimately declines, the franchise could lose valuable time in securing another capable starter. That's why some analysts believe Pittsburgh should prepare an alternative plan now, instead of relying entirely on Rodgers' decision. Carr is one of the few experienced quarterbacks potentially available. What Carr would bring to Pittsburgh. Despite criticism during his career, Carr has quietly compiled a solid statistical resume. Across his time in the league, he has completed 65.1% of his passes, averaged 7.1 yards per attempt, thrown 257 touchdowns with 112 interceptions. He also earned 4 Pro Bowl selections, with his most recent coming in 2022. Carr's career record as a starter, 77 wins and 92 losses, often draws criticism, but that number doesn't tell the full story. Much of his career was spent on rebuilding teams, particularly during his long tenure with the Las Vegas Raiders. Former Pro Bowl offensive lineman and analyst Mark Schlereth has argued that Carr's reputation is somewhat misleading. According to Schlereth, Carr possesses the toughness, intelligence, and leadership qualities necessary to win games, provided he plays in the right system with the right roster around him. And that's where Pittsburgh could theoretically provide a better environment. The Steelers' roster could fit Carr well. The Steelers are rarely a rebuilding team. Their identity revolves around physical defense, disciplined coaching, and a culture built around stability. Even during seasons when the offense struggles, Pittsburgh often remains competitive because of its defensive strength. If Carr joined the Steelers, he wouldn't need to carry the entire franchise on his shoulders. Instead, he could operate within a balanced structure, a strong defense that limits shootouts, a physical running game, a coaching staff known for maximizing veteran talent. In that context, Carr might be able to deliver the steady quarterback play Pittsburgh has been searching for. The biggest question, would Carr return? Of course, all of this speculation depends on one critical factor. Carr has not yet decided whether he wants to play again. During the podcast he hosts with his brother, David Carr, the former quarterback suggested that a comeback would depend on 2 things. 1, his health. 2, the opportunity to join a legitimate Super Bowl contender. That second condition complicates the Steelers' scenario. While Pittsburgh is consistently competitive, analysts debate whether the current roster is truly close to a championship. Ironically, if Carr became their starting quarterback, Some critics would argue that the team becomes less likely to contend, why there's almost no market for Carr. Another factor working against a comeback is timing. Most teams entered the offseason already committed to their starting quarterbacks, and during the early wave of free agency, several teams filled their remaining quarterback openings. According to reports, no teams have contacted the Saints regarding Carr's contractual rights. That lack of interest isn't particularly surprising. Players rarely return from retirement after a year away and immediately perform at a high level, especially at quarterback. Carr will also turn 35 years old soon, adding another layer of uncertainty. Why Pittsburgh could still be an option. Ironically, the lack of league-wide interest might actually make Pittsburgh a more logical destination if Carr does decide to return. Only a few teams still have obvious quarterback uncertainty, including the Las Vegas Raiders, the Arizona Cardinals. However, the Raiders are widely expected to target a quarterback in the upcoming draft, potentially selecting Fernando Mendoza with the top overall pick. Arizona, meanwhile, appears focused on rebuilding rather than contending immediately. That leaves Pittsburgh as one of the few teams where a veteran quarterback could realistically compete for a starting job on a competitive roster, not the first choice. For now, the Steelers' primary focus still appears to be Aaron Rodgers, but smart teams rarely rely on a single plan. If Rodgers ultimately decides to retire or sign elsewhere, Pittsburgh may have to pivot quickly. And if Derek Carr decides he wants one more shot at football and one last chance to chase a championship, the Steelers might become one of the few destinations where that opportunity still exists. In a league where quarterback stability determines everything, even a retired veteran with a $150 million resume can suddenly become part of the conversation again. The quarterback situation for the Pittsburgh Steelers has become one of the most fascinating storylines of the NFL offseason. For months, the franchise has been loosely connected to Aaron Rodgers, with speculation suggesting Pittsburgh might be willing to wait deep into the offseason for the veteran quarterback to make a decision. But that strategy carries obvious risk. Rodgers, now in the twilight of his career, could choose to retire or sign elsewhere. If that happens, the Steelers would suddenly find themselves scrambling for a starting quarterback just weeks before the season. Because of that uncertainty, some analysts are urging Pittsburgh to prepare a backup plan. And one unexpected name that keeps surfacing is Derek Carr. Why Derek Carr is suddenly in the conversation. Carr is one of the most unusual quarterback cases currently connected to the National Football League. Just a few years ago, he signed a 4-year, $150 million contract with the New Orleans Saints, signaling that the team viewed him as a long-term franchise quarterback.